Hi, welcome back to Take from Caesar. My name is David Merlin. Nothing you're going to see or hear is intended as legal advice. Anything that sounds like that to you, just consider it something somebody else might do on a planet far, far away where the law matters. It doesn't matter here. I prove it on a daily basis. It's February 16th, 2020. We're going to go to page 5 of this memorandum. This memorandum was explored in the video here on Take from Caesar called Proving Innocence in Tax Cases. And we're going to look at what the government says innocence is. I'm going to go to the bottom of page 5 to start this view of an indictment that could happen to anybody who has not filed tax returns. You'll see other stuff in the indictment that we'll review. The guy filed probably what are Pete Hendrickson 0 tax returns. He filed 1040 NRs. He filed several bankruptcy actions to avoid liens and levies. I've not yet met the guy. I think I'm going to speak with him soon. But his indictment has been totally redacted for personal information and location, addresses, docket numbers, etc. Because this is just a general look at what could happen to anybody and a revisitation of the thinking, if you want to call it that, the perversion of every U.S. attorney and every assistant U.S. attorney. They steamroll. It's what they do. The law has nothing to do with tax indictments. The law has nothing to do with their assessment as to whether or not they should indict somebody. Innocence doesn't mean a thing if the perversions they've put in place in our justice system will work, then they move forward. And it doesn't matter if you're innocent. It doesn't matter. Because every U.S. attorney and every assistant U.S. attorney is a child molester. Okay? Any questions? And you view all the tutorials here on Take from Caesar. I've been in this a long time. It comes down to exactly these things. Because I'm the one that actually went to court. I'm not in the movement. I'm not part of any movement. I have my own conclusions about the tax code. I did my own analysis. I shut out the movement in 1992 when all the 1040 NR penalties rained down on everybody. And I said, this isn't for me. Shut them out. Started reading on page 1 of the tax code. Page 1. And I found some things. I figured out some bigger things. And I did more work than the, if you want to call them leaders, the leaders of the lemmings. They're leading people right over a cliff. That's not leading, but they say it is. And you can read or watch the tutorials that I have here called The Cult and The Cult 2. And you'll know who these quote-unquote leaders' names are. Anyway, this is the government. The government's own brief in the trial of James Back in Anchorage, Alaska, 2014. This memorandum was filed September 29th of 2014, as you see here. And he was sentenced to 16 months in federal prison for, I think it was 6 Pete Hendrickson tax returns. And as I stated, watch the tutorial called Proving Innocence in Tax Trials, and I go clear through this memorandum with you. But here we're going to focus on how the government defines innocence a certain way, and then we're going to look at an indictment where that certain way didn't matter, didn't figure into it. It doesn't count. The defendant is also charged in the indictment with 4 counts of willful failure to file an income tax return in violation of Tax Code Section 7203. In order for the defendant to be found guilty of that charge, the government must prove each of the following elements beyond a reasonable doubt. First, second, and third. They have to prove these things according to the government. First, the defendant was required to file a tax return for the calendar year ending in these, this is the years for which he was brought up. So they have to prove that the defendant was required to file. How do you do that? You view the law. That's how you prove that. Second, the defendant failed to file an income tax return by the due date as required by law. Third, in failing to do so, the defendant acted willfully, which is a three-pronged test. There is a legal duty, he knew and believed he had a duty, and he failed to perform the duty. And here they make reference to Title 26 of the United States Code, that the law requires a tax return. Watch my tutorial called, what was that one called? America's #1 toilet, the judiciary. And you'll see that they don't have to use the law to prove a thing. They can use a general rule that's not written down anywhere. How do you like that, American? The government says it has to be by law. When you prove the law doesn't impose a duty, they say, well, there's a general rule. Well, where's that book of rules? It better be from Congress, because the 16th Amendment says Congress can lay and collect this tax. Wow. Once you prove the law protects you, they just go, oh, it's a general rule. Is it from Congress? No, it's from the judiciary. The judiciary has created the tax status for compensation for services. When you go by the law, all property is cost. And then they say, well, there's a general rule. The law doesn't displace the general rule. Well, where's that written down? That's an ambush. I relied on the law. Well, you get to court, we go by general rules here. It's not in the law. It's a general rule. That's the thinking of every judge. And you let them go to your churches, you let their children go to the schools where your children go, when in fact they can't raise normal children. And so you have the spawn of greasy child molesters attending the same classes as your children. It's not my burden, folks. It's your burden, your children. I'm not going to police the world of your children for you. Here's model criminal jury instruction from the Ninth Circuit, 9.42, right in the government's memorandum. In order to prove that the defendant acted willfully, the government must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant knew federal tax law imposed a duty on him, and the defendant intentionally and voluntarily violated that duty. A defendant who acts on a good faith misunderstanding as to the requirements of the law does not act willfully, even if his understanding of the law is wrong or unreasonable. Nevertheless, merely disagreeing with the law does not constitute a good faith misunderstanding of the law, because all persons have a duty to obey the law, whether or not they agree with it. Thus, in order to prove that the defendant acted willfully, the government must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did not have a good faith belief that he was complying with the law. No, they don't. They don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did not have a good faith belief. You're going to see in this indictment the U.S. attorney and the assistant U.S. attorneys that went to the grand jury lied their asses off right to the grand jury and said this guy believes he has a duty. And they lied when they said he has a legal duty to believe in. There is no legal duty. It's a general rule. And you don't find that out till you go to court. Oh, we go by general rules here, not by the law. How do you like it, American? So, if he has a good faith misunderstanding of the law, he's innocent for a lack of criminal intent, even if his understanding of the law is wrong or unreasonable. Okay, let's check this out. This is the indictment of Joe Lunchbucket. It could happen to anybody. Filed in January of 2020. As I stated, it's redacted for personal information. His case number and name and the name of his employers. Here we have a 10-page indictment. Joe Lunchbucket, hereinafter Joe, was employed during the period from about, can you narrow it down for us, please? 1996 through 2017. That's 21 years as a computer software engineer. During the period from at least about 2009 through 17, he earned approximately $836,000 in wages. Ballpark $100,000 a year. As a result of his long-standing failure to pay his income taxes, this is what they submitted to the grand jury. They told the grand jury that he failed to pay his income taxes, when in fact we know they can't even prove the law imposes a tax. So they're liars to their cores. Joe had an outstanding tax balance of approximately $326,000. How did Section 83 operate in your conclusion? Wages are gross income. Oh, it's a general rule. We don't have to use the law. The law does not displace the general rule. Watch the tutorial called America's Number One Toilet, the Judiciary. The Internal Revenue Service is and was an agency of the United States Department of Treasury, responsible for administering tax laws and general rules of the United States and collecting taxes and extorting money through a general rule owed to the Treasury of the United States, because that general rule does not come from Congress. Timely payment of lawful taxes, what does the law have to do with a general rule? So no, timely payment of the general rule taxes due is the legal responsibility of all citizens. Wrong. If it didn't come from Congress, it's not a law. So this is a symbol of truth about my statement that the American judiciary is a toilet, and all there are perverts. Now, when I say child molester, I know you're not going to do it. You're going to presume I mean sexual molestation. Read the definition of molest. And of course, a Democrat would never do that, because experts do not exist. They believe what they want so they can throw handfuls of their feces at people. How you can say the word Democrat and not drop an F-bomb is beyond me. Beginning in at least 2004 and continuing through 17, the IRS sent several notices of levy on wages to Joe in an effort to collect past due income taxes. 3 notices of levy on wages, as well as other IRS collection actions, were part of ongoing targeted administrative actions needed to collect Joe's past due taxes. When the IRS became aware of Joe's employment with a particular company, the IRS attempted to collect Joe's past due income taxes by either withholding taxes from his salary or by using tax levies or garnishments of wages from Joe's current employer. During the period from 2009 to 16, in direct response to repeated IRS efforts to collect past due taxes, Joe filed 4 different voluntary petitions for bankruptcy in an ongoing effort to obstruct and impede IRS efforts to collect Joe's past due income taxes. With some of these bankruptcy filings, Joe also filed false and fraudulent tax returns and other tax return-related documents. As part of his 2009 bankruptcy, Joe also submitted several false tax returns, Forms 1040, covering several tax years, which falsely represented to the IRS that Joe had 0 taxable income. I'm going to presume, because I haven't been into this case yet, I haven't interviewed the guy, that they're Pete Hendrickson tax returns. Note at this juncture that a Pete Hendrickson tax return got James back sent to prison for 16 months. Several returns, 16 months in prison. He was making $125,000 a year in Alaska as an Alyeska pipeline engineer, and went to prison, destroyed his life. During the period from about 11 through 14, Joe signed and submitted and caused to be submitted to the IRS 3 false and fraudulent U.S. non-resident alien income tax returns, Forms 1040 NR, in which Joe falsely claimed that he was a non-resident of the United States, as well as other false statements. Did he sign them under penalties of perjury? Yes, he did. Everybody that filed those returns signed them under penalties of perjury. How come that's not prima facie evidence that they don't believe they have a duty, or that they believe they have a misunderstanding of the law? Even if unreasonable, they're innocent, as we just read in the model criminal jury instruction. During the period from about 12 through 15, Joe also provided a false and fraudulent employees withholding certificate under penalties of perjury. to several employers in which he falsely represented the number of exemptions he was entitled to claim. Well, they're going to take my money. If he believes that it's theft, why would he not claim exemptions the IRS doesn't think he's entitled to? Why would he not do that? It's a method of keeping money out of the hands of thieves that seek to steal his money. No, it doesn't matter. We're going to the grand jury and we're going to lie about him. And we're going to get that indictment. During a November 17, 14 bankruptcy hearing in which Joe was present and testified, a United States bankruptcy judge made several statements to Joe to include Joe's theory to justify his non-payment of income taxes was all a big ruse to keep people from paying taxes. Joe's theory amounted to a tax evasion system. And if Joe continued to refuse to pay his income taxes, quote, it's not going to do anything for you in the courts of this country. You're just wasting your time, end quote. That's from a judge. But did the judge show him how Section 83 operated? No. The judge is relying on a general rule that's not even written down anywhere, and it's not from Congress. The courts impose every dime you pay the IRS when all you do is sell your services. The courts did it to you. That's every judge. They're child molesters. The definition of molest, to hinder or annoy. Yeah, I think it hinders children when you steal all the parents' money. Yeah, I think it hinders the children. Elizabeth Chesterton, winter 1992-93, contacted me. And she was a nurse. She worked. She was not retired. 75 years old. And the IRS would not stop levying her pay when they knew that in wintertime in Tacoma, Washington, Elizabeth Chesterton couldn't afford electricity because of the levies. And she was sleeping under a pile of blankets and eating cat food to survive. And they wouldn't lift the levy. That's a baby raper. And it's because of the judges. We have no courts. The IRS owns every court. We're not going to lift the levy on an old woman that's eating cat food to survive. And you want a relationship with that government by filing a tax return they won't accept? Right or wrong? Because right or wrong has nothing to do with this. They'll screw you dead. So the judge says it won't make a difference in any courts in this country. You're exactly right. Even when you beat them with the law, it doesn't matter. You're up against it here. Government is not a strict cop. Government is a pack of carjackers with pistols in prisons. And you're looking right at it. The judge didn't show this guy a law. The judge told him the judge's opinion. All a big ruse to keep people from paying taxes. Prove I owe it. Oh, it's a judge. And the U.S. attorneys, assistants, U.S. attorneys, in this case, quote the judge like this guy is supposed to take the word of the judge. When the word of the judge is, we go by general rules that aren't even written down. The law does not displace our general rules. Watch the tutorial called America's #1 Toilet, The Judiciary, where I prove everything I say. Okay? Except the conjectures. Yeah, baby rape. I'm not going to look at these people long enough to prove it's what they do, but what they do with tax law is proof. There's nothing to hold them back from doing anything to a baby. They all aspire to be on the diaper check at the border. Yeah, we're going to have to take off that diaper and look around because your baby might have a weapon. That's the mind of every federal public servant. As soon as you think it's not, you're next. I have over 27 years of direct experience and 4 years before that of listening to people and studying tax law. But in January of 94, maybe November, December of 93, January of 94, I was writing the first briefs of my life and began litigation. And since then, it's all I've seen. Paragraph 12, even after Joe received personal warnings, I want to see the law. Even after he received personal warnings in November from a United States bankruptcy judge, Joe's refusal to pay taxes amounted to tax evasion and was a big ruse. Joe continued to obstruct and impede the IRS's effort to collect Joe's past due income taxes. But we can't prove the law imposes it. We can only prove that a general rule imposes it. Judges recite that general rule, and it's not written down anywhere. I won't go on about that again. In June of 15 and on November 21st of 16, Joe filed 2 additional bankruptcy petitions to stop IRS tax collection efforts. Good for you, Joe. And they call that impeding the enforcement. He filed bankruptcy actions. That's illegal. Why? Title 11 says you can file bankruptcies. Corrupt endeavor to obstruct and impede the due administration of internal revenue laws and general rules. The grand jury realleges and incorporates by reference all the previous allegations. Okay. Beginning at least in or about 09 and continuing through at least 18, the exact dates being unknown to the grand jury. In the Division of Texas and elsewhere, defendant Joe Lunchbucket did corruptly endeavor to obstruct and impede the due administration of the internal revenue laws of the United States by, among other things, providing employers with false W-4 forms. B. Filing false U.S. individual tax returns, 0 returns. And C. Filing false non-resident alien income tax returns. Did he believe he was obeying the law? They never even asked him. They never do. They just bring the indictment. Because they're child molesters. And D, filing bankruptcy petitions and related documents designed to stop IRS collection activities. That's part of the reason to file bankruptcy. It's legal. And yet they cite it as a corrupt act. Because they're child molesters. The acts committed in furtherance of the endeavor to corruptly obstruct included, but were not limited to, the following. On or about October 09, in response to 8 different IRS levy and garnish actions in which the IRS stole a total of about $30,000 of Joe's wages during the period from March 09 through October of 09, Joe filed and caused to be filed a voluntary petition to the U.S. Bankruptcy Court. That's legal. And they state it here as a corrupt act. It's a corrupt act to do what Title 11 allows you to do. It's an available remedy, and they cite it as a corrupt act because they're child molesters. On or about December 09, Joe signed and submitted and caused to be submitted to the IRS several forms falsely reporting 0 taxable income for 97, 2000, 01, and 07. On or about, were they false returns? How does Section 83 operate? In your conclusion, they're false. Well, it's a general rule that's not written down anywhere. On or about October of 2011, Joe signed and submitted and caused to be submitted 1040 NRs, falsely claiming that he was a non-resident of the United States residing in the country of Texas, falsely reporting that he had 0 taxable income, and claiming a tax refund. Title 28, Section 297, A and B. A refers to the freely associated compact states, and B refers to those states as countries. Now we aren't going to talk about it. It's another secret statute. 28 U.S.C. 297 A and B. On or about September of 12, Joe provided his employer with an IRS form which falsely represented that Joe was entitled to 9 exemptions. I've known of people that claim 6 to stay off the IRS's radar, and they told their employer that they had a home business, and by the year's end they would be entitled to deductions of a certain degree because of the costs of running the home business. Again, none of this is legal advice. On or about October 13, Joe signed and submitted, caused to be submitted, 1040 NRs for 2012, falsely claiming that he was a non-resident alien residing in a foreign country of Texas, falsely reporting that he had zero taxable income, and falsely claiming a tax refund of $3,000. On or about January 14, Joe provided his employer with the false W-4 form that he was exempt from withholding and eliminated the amount of taxes withheld. Exempt. 26 USC, that's the tax code, section 3402N, says, notwithstanding any provision of this chapter, an employer shall not be required to deduct and withhold taxes if there is in effect a W-4 exempt. And so the Treasury wrote two regulations that used to be, they've been stricken, put somewhere else probably, 26 CFR 31.3402 F2-1G5, subclause 2 and 3. Subclause 2 said, if an employer receives a W-4 exempt, notify the IRS right away. And subclause 3 says, if we determine that it's inaccurate, we'll instruct the employer to ignore the form and withhold the maximum amount until Joe bends over and provides full disclosure of all his affairs and files his back tax return and the rest, and they run you through the ringer ab initio from the beginning. Now, those regulations were cited as by me as elements of racketeering and overt acts in part of the authority the IRS falsely obtained through regulatory deviation from statute. January 1st of 06, I filed that complaint with 80 members of Congress, and in my elements of racketeering and overt acts segment of my criminal complaint, which had about, I think it was 19 or so different acts that they commit to get your money, which are illegal, I challenged that regulation. In January of the next year, those regulations disappeared. I did that. You're welcome. I filed 1040 NRs, April 14, that he lived in a foreign country of Texas, falsely reporting zero income and claiming a tax refund of $15,000. On or about May of 14, in response to a notice of levy and wages, he filed a voluntary petition for bankruptcy protection. Title 11 says he's entitled to it, at least until he's had a hearing. And that's illegal. They mentioned it to a grand jury as a corrupt act. Because they're, and you understand. On or about August of 14, filed a false and fraudulent amended Schedule B personal property, falsely stating and representing that Joe had an interest in a certain corporation with a purported value of $347,000. On or about June of 15, in response to a notice of levy, he filed a voluntary petition in bankruptcy court to stop IRS collection efforts. So, the law says you can have it. On or about September of 15, Joe provided his employer with a W-4 form, falsely representing he was exempt. On or about November 16, in response to a notice of levy on wages, he filed a voluntary petition in bankruptcy court. Okay. Page 7. Count 2, attempt to evade and defeat the tax. Remember, they have to prove you owe a tax. They have to prove you knew and believed you had a duty to pay it, and that you failed to pay it. The grand jury realleges all the preceding facts. From in or about September 12 through April of 14, somewhere in Texas, defendant Joe Lunchbucket, a resident of something in Texas, willfully attempted to evade and defeat income tax due and owing him to the United States for the calendar year of 013, which is imposed by a general rule, not by the law, by preparing and causing to be prepared, and by signing and causing to be signed a false and fraudulent 1040 NR. On that tax return, Joe reported and caused to be reported that his taxable income for the calendar year of 13 was zero. In fact, as defendant Joe then knew, his taxable income for 2013 was greater than the amount reported on the income tax return. Really? How did Section 83 operate? Well, it's a general rule we go by. It all comes back to that. If all you did was sell your labor, you're taxed under a general rule that the judiciary goes by, not by law. Everything you pay the government when all you've done is sell your services, self-employed or employee, it's imposed by the general rule that's not even written, and it's not Congress. That includes Social Security. Why? Well, because Section 83 applies to all compensation for services. That means it applies to 1402A, Social Security Self-Employment Earnings. 3121A, FICA, TIPS. FICA TIPS is 3121Q. 3121A is wages, all compensation, salary, blah, 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 blah. And Chapter 23, employers pay matching FICA. Well, if the employee doesn't owe FICA to begin with, the employer doesn't owe it because there's nothing to match. Well, we go by a general rule here too, and so the employer better pay it. Was greater than the amount reported on the tax return, and as a result of such additional taxable income, there was an additional tax due and owing the United States of America that he evaded payment of. 7201, tax evasion. Oh, what do we got here? Counts 3 through 6. That's 4 counts. Failure to file, 7203. During the calendar years referenced in the chart below, the defendant, it's not a chart, it's a matrix, the defendant had and received gross income in excess of the minimum filing requirements referenced in the chart below. $10,000, used to be $400. Anybody that receives an amount equal or in excess of the exemption amount has to file. Tax Code Section 6012. By reason of such gross income, he was required by law, no, by general rule, following the close of the calendar year referenced, to make an income tax return to a person assigned to receive the returns at the local office of the Internal Revenue Service at a certain city in Texas, or to another Internal Revenue Service officer permitted by the Commissioner of Internal Revenue to receive it, stating specifically the items of his gross income and any deductions and credits to which he was entitled. Well knowing and believing all of the foregoing, he did willfully fail on or about the due date referenced in the chart below. Aren't these the years for which he filed 1040 NRs? So we don't care what he said under penalties of perjury on his tax returns. We're going to allege to the grand jury that he knew and believed all the foregoing, and he willfully failed. And who's the grand jury to question that statement when it's overtly false? Failure to file, 4 counts. True bill. Most of the times you don't get a signature from the grand jury foreperson. They redact the entire thing. So there you go. It could happen to anybody who hasn't filed. You take away the 1040 NRs and the 0 tax returns, you still have 4 counts of failure to file a tax return. And you have mongoloid idiots and morons like David Champion and Pete Hendrickson saying you don't have to. And you have me over here going, do it. You don't want a relationship with a government that'll go to a grand jury and lie their asses off to the grand jury about you so they can throw you in prison and destroy your life. You don't want a relationship. Pay the money. Keep the child molesters out of your life. That's every public servant. And you're looking right at proof the federal government is steeped in it. When they aren't raping babies, they're catching their breath. The lies they have to tell to get this indictment. Ready, willing, and able. January of 2020. This indictment. When they've known since 1993. I did a year, the year of 1993, of administrative attempts to get somebody at the IRS to speak about Section 83, to disclose the government's interpretation of Section 83. They refused. They still don't have one, and they still prosecute. How is it not an instance where the tax is not imposed by clear language? How is it not an instance where it's void for vagueness? How is it not an instance where you have to speculate as to the meaning of penal statutes? All three of those tenets are repeated a bunch of times in an abundance of Supreme Court case law. Take my tutorials, especially the early ones here on my YouTube channel. Key to the Code, the Section 83 tutorial, Internal Revenue Ruling 2007-19. Those are a must. You have to watch those tutorials. You'll see my annotations about clear language, due process, you can't be forced to speculate, void for vagueness. Fundamental tenet of due process is that you can't be forced to speculate as to the meaning of penal statutes. Yes, you can, because we lie to grand juries. We're child molesting public servants, and you're looking right at it. We read the description of innocence in the government's own memorandum to open this video. You're staring right at it. The law has nothing to do with the federal government and what it's willing to do to you. It doesn't mean a thing to the federal government. And any public servant to whom the law matters not, you're a baby raper. And I'll be the first one to call you that in open court. You better believe it. Because we got the goods on you. You're enforcing a general rule to steal everything a person pays when all they do is sell their labor. The FICA, the employer's matching FICA, and Chapter 1 income tax, graduated income tax under Section 1, the law doesn't impose it. A general rule imposes it. They know this, and they're still willing to call somebody willful when they know it's a general rule that imposes it, and it's not the law at all. Thanks for visiting Take from Caesar. My name is David Merland. Again, none of this is legal advice. Enjoy my tutorials. wevgov.com. wevgov.com and takefromcaesar.us. Spell it correctly. Take from Caesar, C-A-E-S-A-R. Take from Caesar, wevgov.com, and my YouTube channel, Take from Caesar. It's been my pleasure. I'll see you in the next tutorial.
It was all bullshit.